Hello, everybody. In this lecture, we're going to talk about the protists, which are another type of eukaryotic microorganism. All righty. And so let's get right into it. By the end of this module, you should be able to identify the structural characteristics of protists, differentiate between types of protistan motility, and explain the life cycle of spore-forming protists. All right. So start out with just talking about protists in general. They are a very diverse group of eukaryotes. There are unicellular, multicellular, and multinucleated masses. Um, the multinucleated masses are something we're not going to talk much about, but they are a variation on uh, multicellularity, where you have multiple nuclei, similar to your um, aseptate fungi. They can be autotrophic, which means that they are photosynthesizing, or they can be heterotrophic, which means that they're getting their nutrients from the environment. They can reproduce asexually, they can reproduce sexually, and they may exist with cell walls or without cell walls. So let's talk about some examples. We've got, well, back here, we have the kelp, which is this giant, what looks like a plant but isn't. And then we have the dog vomit mold, which is looks kind of like a fungus, but it isn't. And so these are thought to be these kind of like evolutionary links between animals, or like between your prokaryotes and animals, fungi, and plants. Now, there are a lot of different protozoans that we can talk about. What's important to know is that you've got several of your kind of parasitic protists here, like your Toxoplasma gondii, which is going to be produced by cats. So if you have cats, then there's a reasonable chance that you've been exposed to Toxoplasma gondii at some point. Trichomonas vaginalis, which we talked about in class the other day, and you've got Giardia lamblia, or Giardia species. And Giardia is this organism that's found oftentimes in like fresh, like running water. And so it can cause what's known as like hiker's diarrhea, where you drink water out of a what looks like a clean stream. And then the Giardia, after about a week or so of incubation, causes pretty severe diarrhea. Now, your protozoans are going to be differentiated by their method of motility. You've got amoeboid, flagellated, ciliated, and spore forming. And so your amoeboid organisms like Entoamoeba histolytica, which is probably like the most common amoeboid um, infection, are going to have these little pseudopods that you can see coming off. And so these pseudopods, of course, are um, going to be formed by rearrangement of the cytoskeleton, which allows you to kind of change the shape of these cells. And then, of course, the amoeboids have the disease causing organism that I am most afraid of, which is Naegleria fowleri, which is the brain eating amoeba. Then you've got these flagellated organisms like Giardia lamblia, which we talked about. And so they have these flagella that come off the ends. And remember, those flagella are made of tubulin attached to um, the centriole, which is the basal body. And and that is membrane bound as well. Then we have our ciliated organisms like Tetrahymnema thermophila, which the cilia can be used for movement as well, but you got a lot of them usually, and they're covered all over these little hair-like structures. And remember, they kind of move with that like oar-like motion, whereas your flagella are going to have more of a swim-like motion. And then we have spore-forming organisms like Plasmodium. So remember, Plasmodium falciparum is what causes malaria. And what you see here is the sporocyte stage. And so these don't generally have a directed movement ability, right? They don't have these things that allow them to move. So we have our amoeboids, as I mentioned, they have pseudopods. They go through up to 3 stages. Not all amoebas are going to see all 3 stages. It's got the cyst stage, the trophozoite stage, and the flagellated stage. Um, some of them are going to be free living, and some are pathogenic, as in like the Naegleria fowleri that I talked about, or the Entamoeba histolytica. And over here, you can see these different stages. The amoeboid stage is in this trophozoite, right? So this is where they are very amoeboid. The cyst is kind of like a dormant stage, like as during reproduction, it's kind of finding the right environment. And then flagellated stage is this directed movement stage where you can use these flagella to move around. Then you have your flagellated protozoans. Some of these are going to be free living. You've got this photosynthetic organism, Euglena, which is it's got all these green sections in there, right? Because it's able to photosynthesize. I know this is a cartoon, but it's still the same idea. But also stuff like Trichomonas vaginalis, which we talked about, trypanosoma, which causes African sleeping sickness, and and um, Giardia lamblia, which causes hiker's diarrhea. We got our ciliated protozoan. These are often found in aquatic environments. You've probably heard of the paramecium, potentially seen some in your like in your biology classes if you've taken them before. Not very many are parasitic to humans, although some are parasites to other organisms. The major one that is a parasite to humans is this Balantidium coli. Um, so this is the only known ciliated pathogens for humans. Then we got our spore formers. This is a big group of protozoans. They're going to move primarily just by gliding in the environment. They don't have any of these specialized moving pieces, right? No flagella, no cilia, no pseudopods. And most that we're aware of, at least the ones that are studied, are these obligate intracellular parasites. They usually have very complex sexual and asexual stages. So here are some examples of different types of apicomplexa or spore-forming protozoans. So some of them we talked about, like Toxoplasma and Plasmodium. You can see that there are all sorts of size differences in there, and all these little guys are different disease-causing organisms. All right, and they have this kind of complex life cycle. First, you have merogeny, which is asexual cell division, and it's going to produce these uh, these little merozoites, and then you get that followed by gumogeny, which is going to have meiosis, and it's going to give you your merozoites, which are the gametes. And when the gametes fuse, just like in other eukaryotes, you get a zygote. Then you get sporogeny. And this is where you get your cell division of your zygote, and you get the production of a sporozoite. All right. And so then everything starts over. So your sporozoite is going to infect your host cell, undergo merogeny inside the host cell where you produce the merozoites. Which of course is asexual, gumogeny, which is going to produce gametes, formation of the zygote, and then sporogeny, which is replication of the zygote to form sporozoites. So that is their process. Now, this oftentimes have some intermediate stages where maybe half of this process happens in one host and then the other half happens in another. And so it can be a little complicated. And here's another, just kind of more of a written explanation of what I just talked about, explaining the different processes that go on in these 3 stages. And so the big thing to kind of think about is that merogeny is going to be this asexual reproductive stage. Gamogeny is going to be the sexual reproductive stage. And then sporogeny is going to be the growth of that zygote to a sporozoite. And generally, that sporozoite is what is going to cause infections. And so, again, these cause all sorts of diseases such as toxoplasmosis, malaria, cryptidiosporosis, and microsporidiosis. And some of them require arthropod vectors, kind of like malaria, where they're getting transmitted by mosquitoes. Babesia is also transmitted by mosquitoes, and trypanosoma as well. All right, so with that, you should be able to identify the structural characteristics of protists, differentiate between types of protistan motility, and explain the life cycle of spore-forming protists. All right, with that, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you soon.